fame. I just want to say we've had some breaking news in the last hour or so, and it's that Adrian Street, adorable Adrian Street, has passed away at the age of 82. Such sad news. An innovator, pioneer. He set the tone for many androgynous characters in pro wrestling after him. And it's just such a shame. It's such a shame that he's passed. So, yeah, just wanted to do a little tribute before I go live with Jim Brunzell. And our thoughts and condolences to Miss Linda as well. Adrian Street has passed away at the age of 82 today. Chopper Joe, it's an absolute pleasure. And can I just sing one line of your entrance music, please, sir, before we get going? He's the Mountie. He got under my skin when I was a kid, but he always got his man. There you go. There you go. Just brief. But yeah,
don't. Hi, Stewie. Don't quit your day job. Don't go into singing.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong there. Yeah, I'll stick to podcasting. That's yeah. I'm never going to.
Fans out in the UK, I just want to shout out to all you guys and say thank you to Stewie, because you know what? I love this podcast, and remember, Stewie, the Mountie always gets his man.
You're listening to Stu's Wrestling Podcast. It's time. Your host, Stu Palmer.
Well, have I got a treat for you guys today? It is 80s and 90s wrestling legend all the way from Minnesota. It is Mr. Jumpin, Jim Brunzell on Stu's Wrestling Podcast today. What a pleasure. What an honor. I did watch you when I was younger. I caught the tail end of WWE, obviously, and it's just an honor to have you on Stu's Wrestling Podcast, Jim.
Well, Stu, you must be pretty old if you watched me when you were younger. But also, I'd like to send my condolences to Adrian Street's wife, and may he rest in peace. You know, like I mentioned before, he was, we never traveled in the same lanes, and I had heard of him, but I didn't know him or I never met him. So too bad.
So sad, honestly,
yes.
Man. But yeah, it's what he did for pro wrestling, you know, a guy of his stature, you know, he was smaller than a lot of the guys. So to get over in that time, you know, at that size is just incredible. And yeah, very, very sad. But Jim, I'm going to get into some questions for you first, because a friend of mine over in Milwaukee, Justin Clapper, has sent in a lot of questions. A lot of them are geared towards AWA. And the first one is here. I'm going to get it up on screen right now for you. AWA is my favorite promotion. I know a lot of current fans dog AWA. Can you please tell me a few of the best things about wrestling for him? And this is from my friend Justin Clapper, Jim, and he's a huge fan of yours.
Well, you know, I was broke in by Vern Gagne, who was co-owner of the AWA. And at that time, you know, this was in the early 1970s. You look at, you know, there was 26 different territories in this country in the United States where you could wrestle outside, you know, and also in Canada. And the AWA was, to me, at that time, the cream of the crop. And, you know, I mean, you look, the greatest thing about the AWA, Stu, was the fact that, you know, being that our winters are so long in the Midwest and Minnesota, et cetera, Vern and Wally realized that, so they didn't book a lot into the late spring and summer. So we had, instead of working, you know, 27 days a month like we did in the WWE for 3.5 years straight, we only worked about 12 times a month. And we made good money. They had great talent. They had Nick Bockwinkel, Vern Gagne, Billy Robinson. Oh, gosh, Baron von Raschke. The greatest of all, I thought, was Bobby Heenan, who he could do anything. And, you know, Greg and I had a great opportunity, you know, to wrestle guys like Pat Patterson, Ray Stevens, Bobby Duncombe, Blackjack Lanza, you know, Buddy Wolf. It was just a great area to work, you know, and you learn. There was only like 14 guys, so it wasn't like the WWE where they had 60 guys and, you know, 20. They ran 3 towns a night in New York, and they had 20 guys in each town. So it was, you know, Yeah, AWA was great. It was my home. I had to leave it because when Hulk left the AWA and Vince took over all the wrestling, there was, if you wanted to make money, you had to go to the WWE. Period. That was it.
Do you think Hulk did them dirty? You know, when he left, there's been a lot of scrutiny about that at the time. You know, he was doing what was best for him. But you know, had he said to them, had he give them reassurances? Because I've read stuff over the years, you know, to Vern that he was going to stay. What's your perception of it with Hulk?
Well, I think that to be honest, this is my own feeling is that Vern was a very egotistic man, and he had his ideas on who he wanted to represent the AWA as far as his champion. He was All-American boy, All-American national champ, you know, wrestled in the Olympics. And I think it would have been a little too hard for him to acknowledge Hulk Hogan, a big muscular guitar player from Tampa, Florida, as the AWA champion. That's just my own feeling. But, and I think, you know, I think that was the reason why Hulk never got the belt. And, you know, it all worked out great for him because, you know, he was the golden goose that, you know, send forth, you know, Hulkamania and WrestleManias and really put pro wrestling on the top.
Absolutely. Justin Clapper again, Jim. Everybody asks about teaming with Greg and Brian, but how was teaming with Mike George? I don't hear enough about the timekeeper. Any good stories? And that's from Justin Clapper again. Huge fan of yourself and the AWA.
Well, you know, I was in the AWA for about 6 months, and this was like 73, and they sent me down to Central States Wrestling, which was based in Kansas City, Missouri, and it was run by Pat O'Connor and Bob Geigel. And there was another young, big baby face from St. Joe, Missouri by the name of Mike George. So they decided to put Mike and I together, and we had a heck of a team. And Mike was a hell of a worker. And, you know, he went to Oklahoma after we broke up and I went back to the AWA. He went to Oklahoma, and I think he wrestled in Texas a little bit, but I've still tried to get a hold of him, just see how he's doing. But yeah, he was a marvelous guy, and we had a heck of a team. We beat Roger Kirby and Lord Alfred Hayes in 1973 for the Central States Heavyweight Tag Team Championship. And we had a good little run in Kansas City. You know, the territory was more or less a 7-day-a-week adventure. And you drove just about every place, you know. I mean, like they had Monday, Wichita, Tuesday, Topeka, Kansas. And then I think Wednesday they had a spot show. And then Thursday they had Kansas City. Friday they had St. Louis and St. Joe, Missouri. And then Saturday they always had Iowa Town, and Sunday Iowa Town. And then you start over again. So it was a unique place to go because I got to meet the Funk Brothers and also the Briscoe Brothers, and I watched them, you know, all the time in the ring, and I learned from them, and you know, it was a great education for me to be there. And Mike was a great guy, and is. I don't know how he's doing. I've been trying to get a hold of him, but nobody's got any numbers on him. So I might even call the St. Joe, Missouri police and see if they can get me through to him.
If you can get an answer, Jim, any by hook or by crook, any means necessary to get hold of him, yeah, absolutely. And the questions keep coming. I'm telling you.
Okay.
This is from Joe Lowry, a friend of mine. He's from Boston. He's had his own podcast over the years. Living in Iowa now is Joe. Great guy. Elder than me. You know, watched it a lot longer than me, pro wrestling. My question for Jim Brunzell: who would he consider his best tag partner to work with, Greg Gagne or Brian Blair? Thanks. # what a day.
Well, I want to clarify this right off the bat. My best tag team partner was my wife, Mary, of 48 years. But now getting, you know, it's hard to say because Greg and I had a different atmosphere to work with. like I said, we had 14, 16 guys in the AWA. Everybody knew their position. And, we had great talent to work with. And in the WWE, Brian and I had, a lot of guys to work with, but everybody was worried about, looking bad, and they didn't want to do this and they didn't want to do that. So consequently, the matches weren't very good. So I think as far as success was concerned, Greg and I, we were 2-time AWA World Team Champions. It doesn't get any better than that. And we were Professional Wrestling Illustrated Tag Team of the Year, I think it was 1982 or something like that. And Brian and I had a tough road to go. Brian's a great wrestler, and we had a great tag team, and we had, great matches. But for some reason or other, Mr. McMahon, and I know one of the reasons why, because he and I didn't get along, both politically and business-wise. And I knew, I'll tell you a little story, and this is a true story. I started there on June 26, 1985, and I flew into Newark, New Jersey, and I got on a small plane with a big old guy, and his name was Jim Morris, Hillbilly Jim Morris, and we flew into Poughkeepsie, and that was the first day of TV. So they're doing an interview, and Gene Okerlund, who had left the AWA for the WWE, he and I were, like brothers. So he had just a real babyface interview with me, and just talking about my past and, how excited I was to come to the WWE. So I give a regular babyface interview. And as I'm walking away, I hear Vince McMahon say, "Oh God, we got another Backlund." So when I heard that, and I thought, well, geez, Bob Backlund was the world champion for 5 years. So maybe that way. And then I thought right away, no, because I know Vince Jr. really didn't care for Bobby, because he didn't want all-American type wrestler. He wanted a gimmick wrestler to, so he could sell, gifts, or not gifts, but all the doggone memorabilia, that he wound up selling for Hulk and the rest of us too.
I just how it was, wasn't it? But yeah, just interesting to hear about that, and Vince's psyche with it. But yeah, just absolutely. Another one here, Jim, from Porfirio Cantu Jr. Ask him how hard it was to break the glass ceiling at WWF while he was there. Was it impossible, and how much was politics? I'm sure you can go into a bit more depth there on the politics side.
Well, there was 60 guys in the WWE at this time, and all the Vince had sucked all the talent out from everybody. Texas, AWA, Florida, Georgia, Canada. I mean, he had it all, and Vince was. He didn't want to follow the old format of pro wrestling. He didn't want to go from match to match to match to crescendo to build the houses up, because, he had all these towns, he had, 3 towns a night, for the whole year. So he never went to a match and then had a finish of a match. I hope you can't hear my cat, but that's Bruce in the background.
I could hear
that's my son's cat, and his name is Bruce, and he can play the guitar. So, getting back, it was just a lot harder in the AW or in the WWE, because unless Vince really took a liking to you, you struggled. We were more or less promised the belts a couple different times. And it never happened. We had great matches with a lot of guys. We had great matches with the Harts, the Rougeaus, you name it. And it never happened. So it was a little discouraging for Brian and I. And consequently, it was time to clean house. I believe it was in 1988 or 89. So Brian just says, well, I'm leaving. So he went back and he, had he owned 3 Gold's gyms in Tampa, Florida. So he was set. But I had my own business in my hometown of White Bear Lake, Minnesota, Stu. It was called Jumpin' Jim Brunzell's Gym. So I had a 5,000 square foot, building, and I had, 550 members, and I needed added money to keep that thing going. So I had to stay at the WWE, which, was not very good for me because Vince took advantage of me, and, I let him do it, but I needed the money. So I think I wound up there. My last match was in 93 or 94. So, and I'll never forget what he said to me. He said, Jim, he says, no matter what you do, you're going to be a success. And I felt like saying, thanks a lot, Vince, because pro wrestling doesn't prepare you for anything. And that's a question that I think you should ask all wrestlers, Stu, because it doesn't. I mean, you work your ass off for your career, whether it be 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years. And if you don't save enough to put away, at the end of the line, there's nothing there. And what does wrestling as a profession offer you? What does the WWE or the AEW offer you? I don't know. I don't know if they have, some sort of hospitalization, insurance plan, retirement. I doubt it. But so the guys are, even though the guys now are making, a ton of money. I mean, I see some of these guys are making 3, 4, 5 million a year with the WWE. And I think Brian and my biggest year was like $120,000. And we wrestled, almost 300 times during the year to get it.
It's crazy, isn't it? Just like obviously how much they get now. Yeah.
Yes.
Look at Brock Lesnar's contract for so many dates. He's got the best. He's got the best contract in pro wrestling.
I know.
It's incredible.
Well, good for him.
Yeah,
I remember talking to him before when he was still an amateur. He was from Minnesota, and he was a great champion and a tough kid and a great, amateur wrestler. And I just said, hey, if you want to go to the Olympics, or if you want to do something more in, amateur wrestling, I says, the pro wrestling will be there for you at the end. And he's gobbled it up, and he's been very fortunate, and he's done extremely well. So he's one of the few that could probably just walk away and say, I don't need it. I know, I don't know the pays, schedule now for these guys, but I'm sure they're, a lot of them are up in the millions a year. And, Hulk Hogan was the highest paid athlete in 1985. He made $10 million. And I don't know if you remember, but it was Sports Illustrated. I have it someplace in my catalogs downstairs. It had a big picture of Hulk, and it said sports top kahuna, and, highest paid, 10 million. And when Hulk was in his prime there, in 84, 85, 86, 87, 88, he was getting $50,000 a week in money from this t-shirts, the revenue, merchandise, 50 grand.
What would that be in today's money, Jim?
Oh,
inflation.
God.
If we're working on today's inflation,
it'd probably be 150, 200,000 a week.
That was big money back then.
It was.
More then, astronomical even back then.
And he got 10 or 12% of the gate, every gate when he was wrestling, and then he also got $1 million for every pay-per-view. So he was doing well, but I'll mention this briefly. I got involved with Gene Upshaw, who was the president of the NFL Football's Union. And I had told him that I had talked to some people about trying to get a union for wrestling because it really needed it, not only for the pace, but also for, hospitalization. If you got hurt in wrestling, you goodbye. And then you'd have to pay for your own surgery. So Gene Upshaw told me, he says, Jim, he says, if you get involved with this, he says, you're going to run into a lot of hard-nosed people and it's going to be tough on you. And I said, well, I'm getting towards the end of my career. And I know Jesse Ventura did a little bit, but Vince fired me 3 times, and it's just too bad. And like I say, I have no idea how it is working for the AEW or the WWE now. All I can say is that briefly watching both programs, they both look the same to me. There's no good guy. There's no, everybody's a badass. Everybody's going to kick their ass. And, and then you watch their matches, and there's 50 high spots in a row, with 20 false finishes. And then a guy runs in, and then, everybody runs into the ring, and boom, boom, mayhem. And oh my God, and it's just, it's the art of pro wrestling is gone, really.
Absolutely.
That's my opinion.
Jim, we've had some live comments as well because we're going live on the social media. My good pal Mike Angus here in the UK lives in Liverpool. R.I.P. Adrian Street. Great to see you interviewing Jumpin' Jim.
Thank you, Mike.
And then we've got Jack Reynolds, who's down in the south of England. Afternoon, gents, from Jack Reynolds, Jim.
Hey, Jack, how's it going? What time is it there, Stu?
It's just coming up for 3:15, 3:15 UK time, Jim.
Okay.
And then Jay Brony, who's done a lot with pro wrestling on the East Coast. I know he does stuff with Paul Roma, with Paradise.
Oh, okay.
So Jay's involved with that. He's worked in the business for years. Great guy. Good morning, Stu and Jim.
Well, Jay, thanks for listening.
and then just the final one in the comments, on the live comments, it's Lewis Young from Scotland up in Falkirk there. Hey all. Hello, Lewis.
Hey, Lewis. My wife is just watching the end of Outlander, and I think that was Scottish ancestry that went from there on. So she loves it. So
there you go, Lewis. There you go, Lewis. Full circle there. Absolutely. Now, Jim, we've got a question from Oscar Castillo that he sent in a few days ago. How was it working with big territorial acts, LOD, Brainbusters, and those tag teams from our region?
Legion of Doom, which was the Road Warriors, were hard to work with because they had established a persona that they were the baddest guys in town. And if they sold a little bit, or if they put their opponent over a little bit, they thought it hurt their cred. So it was extremely hard working with them. Greg and I had a couple matches with this, let's see, I think it was in Winnipeg. And it turned out pretty good. And then I know that when the Road Warriors came to Vince gave him the name of Legion of Doom, and they just sputtered around. I think that the fact that Vince didn't create them had an effect on them getting built up and making bigger gates and houses and more money, etc. And it's a shame that both of them have passed away at such a young age. Mike and Joe, we're good guys, and holy smokes. I mean, when you're dropping off like that, you never know. Every day's a gift.
Absolutely. Yeah, because Hawk had cleaned himself up as well, hadn't he? More latterly. He'd really got himself straight, and then it caught up with him, bless him. But yeah, I was a huge fan of LOD when I was a kid. Absolutely. Yes. Absolutely.
Well, they were very impressive. That's for sure. They used to say, and we're going to come and kick the shit out of you. And they did.
And I've got another one from JC here. How did your relationship with Vern and Greg change after the moves to WWF, WWE?
Well, here's a story not known to many people, but before I left the AWA, I went to Vern and I told him, I says, Vern, I says, things are getting rough around here. Hulk's gone, everybody's gone. And I need to make some more money, and I'd like to have a personal contract with you for me a year so I can, make ends meet. And he says, well, how much do you want? And I said, $95,000. And this was 1985. And he says, go to New York. You're not worth it. So that sort of broke my heart, after being, but that's the sort of guy Vern was. He was very egotistical in business, but so I went to New York, and I never looked back. And I know I burnt a couple bridges, and Greg, after I left, I mean, the AWA they couldn't do anything. They tried, working something in Vegas, and just didn't work. They just didn't have the talent. So that was it.
Absolutely, without enough. Cheers for that one, JC. Absolutely. Porfirio Canto Jr. again here, Jim. What a great working team. He's alluding to the Killer Bees, obviously, there. They put the work in, and they help keep WWF in the limelight. Great tag team. What a great working team. They put the work in, and they help WWE keep in the limelight. I've pasted this in twice, but yeah. So he's just alluding to how strong, the tag division was. It was the best time for tag wrestling. It's never been as hot as when you guys were in it, man. I've always said that. I've always maintained that.
That was, and the Killer Bees, was a very unique team because we were doing something never done before by a babyface team, and that's using a heel gimmick with the mask, to put the mask on and, confuse our opponents and win a match. And it got over like a son of a gun. And it's just too bad it didn't get over with Vince. But, we had, I remember we had a match with the Hearts in Buffalo on TV. And it was the first time we used the mask. And we pulled an upset off and beat them. And it wasn't a championship match, but the crowd went crazy. My God, it went crazy. And, Vince could have made a fortune having Killer Bee masks, but he never did. He never went for it. I thought, Jesus, here is a brand new gimmick. Those masks they could have sold for $15 or $20 and sold a fortune. But he I don't know, he just he wanted to control what he wanted.
And we've also got another Justin Clapper said to me previous, right? He said, please don't make me look like a mark, but he's just a huge fan. He said, AWA, he's always sending me clips of all the old matches, man. So I said, you're not a mark. I said, you're not a mark. I said, you've been in the business yourself. I don't class him as a mark. And here we go. What were your thoughts on wrestling for Herb Abrams, UWF? And he's also said, thank you for the opportunity to ask some of these questions. Not a problem, JC. I know Jim's loving this.
Well, I enjoy it because it brings back memories. But Herb Abrams was a real strange guy. He had some money, and he was a wild son of a gun. And he wanted to promote this and he wanted to do that. And I remember wrestling in Vegas, and I think it was at the big doggone. I'm trying to think of the name of it. The hotel, it burned down, but they redid it, and he had about 8,000 people in this auditorium that probably held 15. But Herb was sort of a dreamer, and we won the whatever it was, the UWF tag team championship belts, and we went to Hawaii for a show and did a couple more shows in Vegas, and Herb was a dreamer, and he just really didn't have the wherewithal to compete with Vince. Vince, the reason why Vince was so successful when he first came out against the other territories, he had Dick Ebersol, who was a producer for ABC Wide World of Sports, and he ran the TV, Dick Ebersol, and he made that TV, which cost about between $150,000 and $200,000 a show. He presented that, to the world, where the rest of the small little, territories, like the AWA, they spent $2,500 on a Saturday TV presentation for an hour. So when people saw that tremendous, TV show with all the different cameras and angles and everything else, and the music and everything, there was just no comparison. So that's where Vince really got ahead of everybody.
I'll tell you what, the Dark Side of the Ring episode on Herb, oh my days. it's it was crazy. It was crazy. Like, I couldn't believe what we're seeing. But yeah, I do find with the dark side of the ring, though, Jim, I think some of the episodes at 40, 45 minutes aren't long enough, you know.
Yeah. Well, there's so much to tell, and there's so many viewpoints, and you know, pro wrestling was, you know, it was good to me, but you're gonna get out of it what you put into it. So, and you know, there's a lot of different things, just like any other society, any other business in society, Stu. You got drugs, you got alcohol, you got sex, you know, you got all this stuff going around, and you know, you're basically, you know, you have an advantage because you're on TV. And you know, the problem was, when you, like I mentioned before, when you have a workload where you're working 25 days a month, and the wives are at home with your kids trying to, you know, raise them properly, and then you get home for 3 days. First day you rest, second day, you know, you go out with the family, and third day you got to pack up and get ready to go again for 3 weeks. So that's the way it went. And like I said, my best tag team partner was my wife, because I don't know how she did it. I mean, she, you know, she ran my business for another year and a half while I was gone, my gym business, and then raised our kids. And, you know, both of my kids are very successful, you know, got their master's degree. And, you know, I'm just so blessed, really.
How was it psychologically for you with that? You know, with how many days you're on the road? How were you psychologically? You know, missing the family and stuff.
Oh God! Well, here's the deal. At that point, if you're a wrestler and you're in the prime of your career, you've got to do that, because there's no other place you can go. And like I said, wrestling doesn't prepare you for nothing, because it's year long. You don't have an off season. So unless you want to work at a gym, or you want to work for the WWE, or you want to work for the AEW as an agent or something, or you can work in at a arena, or you can work in a bar. You know, a lot of guys will get a bar or something like that and do fairly well, but it's just hard, you know, getting ahead. So you can just say, hey, you know, I'm 50 years old. I can't wrestle anymore. You know, I know I've had 12 surgeries since wrestling. I've had 6 operations on my knees. I've had both my knees replaced. I had one replaced 3 times. I've had both shoulders replaced. And I've had a hip replaced. And then I've had work done on my elbow for a depressed nerve. So, you know, I mean, Stu, I wrestled about 27 years, and I had almost 5,000 matches.
Incredible.
And I, you know, I was pretty active in the ring. You know, I did a lot of drop kicking and scissors. I had scissors and bounding and stuff like that. So I beat up my body pretty good. And then, you know, you don't realize that when you're a young guy, you know, when you're 25 or 30 or even 35, but when you get past 40, you start realizing it. And then all of a sudden you think, oh, geez, you know, I'm going to have some problems. So, you know, I mean, most of the guys that I know, God bless them, that are alive today are all, you know, hobbled up and have all had multiple surgeries and, you know, knee replacements, hips, shoulders, everything. So, you know, my wife's waiting for the brain replacements too.
Oh my word! That, you know, thank you, you guys putting your bodies on the line for our enjoyment, the fans. I know you've got to want to do it yourself, but especially from our end, you know, hearing that list of all the surgeries you've had, man. Thank you for gracing our screens and doing that. You know, really, like, it's suffering for the art, isn't it? Really, when you want to put it in that terms.
Well, you know, it's funny because when you do it, you hardly realize it because you're in shape. You're doing the same thing almost every night, unless, you know, out of a quirk deal where something happens, you know, if the rope breaks and you go flying through the rope and, you know, hit your head on the cement or break your arm or something like that. But generally, all the guys were in great shape. You know, guys, you know, during that heavy workload with the WWE, they worked out almost every day. We worked out every day, and they partied quite a bit, but at the same time, they still worked out, and they a lot of them, really took care of their body in terms of how much food they ate and what they ate. A lot of overdid it with substance abuse, but that, like I say, that's part of any business in any society.
Absolutely. Now, I'm going to have to squint to read this one because I've done a screenshot from YouTube. I did a short yesterday just promoting the episode, and it's from Doug Mayers. It is. Jim, what is your gym workout like nowadays? It's like a 2-part question. So, yeah, we'll go with that first. What's your gym workout like these days?
I work out 4 times a week. I'm limited. I can't do any leg press, leg curl, squats because of my knees. And then I can't lift more than 20 pounds with my arms because I have this weird looking gizmo in both my shoulders that are screwed into the humerus. And what happens if I lift up too much weight, it'll pull the joint out of socket, and then I'll have to have it redone. So what I do is I'll go in and I only work out 25 to 30 minutes. I'll go in and I'll row, rowing machine, or I'll do a recumbent bike for 10 minutes just to warm up. And then I'll do like 3 or 4 sets of, and it's sort of embarrassing. I'll go to the seated bench press and I'll put 25 and 30 pounds on and do 20 reps. And I'll do it, 3 sets of 20. And then right from there, I'll do some upright rows with 20 pounds. I'll do lateral raises with 20 pounds. I'll do bent over lateral raises with 20 pounds or less. And then from there, I'll do some tricep push downs, maybe 3 sets of 15 or so with 25 or 30 pounds. And then I'll do 2 or 3 sets of sit-ups. I'll stretch a little bit, and then I'll have my protein shake, and I'm off. That's it. I'm done in 30 minutes.
Perfect. I'm sure you appreciate that answer. And then the second part of the question from Mr. Mayers is also, when you broke your hand in Rockford, Illinois,
yes,
was that at the Metro Center? I'm from Rockford, and that's where I went to see you guys. The AWA came to Boylan High School.
Yes. Well, the WWE, I was wrestling. It was Brian and I against Brutus Beefcake and Greg the Hammer Valentine. And I had a double wrist lock on Greg Valentine, and I went to take him over. And when I went to take him over, he put his hand on top of my hand and squeezed it and trying to break the hold. And his pressure on top of my pressure, I felt the inside of my hand break right in here. And you could hear it too. It went pop, and I said, shit. I said, Greg, I broke my goddamn hand. So I go to tag Brian, and I said, I broke my hand. And he says, no, you didn't. So I wrestled. I went home after that. I had to wait 2 days. My hand swelled up, and they put this cast on. I had a cast to about here. And I came with this cast, and the Killer Bees won more matches with me clotheslining people with this, cast on my left arm than we ever did with the drop kick or whatever else, so that went, and I think I had that cast on for about 4 or 5 weeks, and that was it. But yeah, it was Boylan High School. Jeez.
That's good, man. It's good that you could remember that happening and where you were as well. Yeah.
You're lucky, Stu. I can remember anything, because sometimes I'll be talking to my wife and she'll say, "What'd you say?" And I said, "What did I say?" So maybe that's normal in couples, a conversation after 48 years. So
absolutely, each of it inside and out. Absolutely. Now, moving on from Twitter. It's the HWO, the Hasbro World Order. They do a lot of collecting of memorabilia, figures, and things like that. Great guys here in the UK. I think they were over at WrestleMania this past April in LA as well. They went over, and it's about the new figures from Epic Toys UK. Are Jim and Brian excited for upcoming Epic Toys UK Killer Bees retro figures? We think they look great. So what do you reckon, Jim?
Yeah, I think this Epic took over for a company, I think it was called Chappelle or something like that, but they were out of England. And they went out of business and Epic bought them. And both Brian and I had signed a contract with that earlier company. And then when Epic took over, we haven't heard a thing. So I'm looking at these, action figures and hoping that they'll, get in touch with us or, send us a check or something. But I know my lawyer looked at the contract and looked at the letter and he just says, well, we'll just sort of wait and see. But it's always fun, I mean, when you have these action figures. I have a couple action figures of Greg and I think it was LJN, and then also a couple Killer Bee ones. And, it's sort of fun. And, my kids collected them. I think we have probably 30 action figures down in the closet, and the paints come off a lot of them, especially Hulk, because he won every match.
True to life. I had the figures, I had the rings, I had the WCW ring with a cage, I had the Hasbro WWF, and then when I went to my cousin's house or he came, we had 4 rings on the go. And then my older cousins, they had the WCW ones as well. So we had mass Royal Rumbles, Battle Royals, you name it. When we came together, there's about 60, 70 figures going on. Colossal, but great times. The best times for me personally, it's got to be said. Absolutely. And a final question from Justin Clapper. He is not a mark. How was the atmosphere at WCW Slamboree Legends Reunion? Any good stories from the 6-man tag match?
Well, as I remember, it was Wahoo Me and somebody else against Don Morocco and Dick Murdoch and somebody else. But and it was sort of fun, I mean, we're all done with our careers more or less. But I got to tell you, the last match of that night was Dory Funk Jr. against Nick Bockwinkel. And they were both great champions in their own right. Nick was off and on AWA champion, and he was a tag team champion. And then Dory Funk Jr., was NWA champion off and on and a big star in Japan. And I tell you, these two guys went in and they had a 30-minute match and they stole the show. They were incredible. And and they were both, knocking on, 50 or, 52 years old. And a matter of fact, I don't know if you can, I'm going to see if I can put this up here. Dory Funk, I had 2 great pictures of me drop kicking Dory Funk. And one was in the Toronto Sun paper. It was after the big event, and it was Hulk Hogan and let's see, who was it? Hulk Hogan and Paul Orndorff. And this was back in like 87 or so. And Brian and I worked with Dory Funk and Jesse Barr, who went as, and this picture here is a drop kick of me in Tokyo with Dory Funk.
Wow.
So you can
Incredible.
see,
Incredible.
And I have another picture of a drop kick. And I told Dory, I saw Dory the other day. Well, the other week we were in a small show signing autographs, and he was there with his wife. And, Dory's, I don't know, he's got to be close to 90 now. And I gave him that picture, and I said, Dory, I said, I just want to tell you that, you were one of the greatest champions, during wrestling, period. And I says, I just want to thank you for taking 2 of the greatest bumps that I ever had delivering a drop kick, because he did. I don't know if he had a choice because I got him right in the jaw, but he sold it great. And they were both wonderful pictures. As a matter of fact, I have this one here that I was going to show, and I'm going to just, this is a book that I wrote, and this is the picture of me hitting Dory, and that was in the Toronto Sun, and that was a great drop. That's the best drop kick picture I think I've ever had. I have another one with Nick Bockwinkel, but it wasn't in color. but there was, 50 some thousand people at this show, and it was in the Toronto Sun the next day. So it's funny because I get up and we're flying out of town, and I grab the paper and I open up the front page, and here's the picture of my drop kick. And I thought, holy Jesus, and it took me 6 to 8 weeks to get that photographer to send me a print. He wasn't going to do it. And I told him, I said, don't worry, I won't sell them. I won't sell them. But he was kind enough to send them to me, and I've used it. As a matter of fact, this was a book I wrote about 5 years ago. It's called Matlands.
I want to speak about Matlands as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's fine. It's fine. Carry on. It's fine.
Well, it was something, I after I retired, we go out with a couple of different couples, and I invariably tell, stories from the wrestling, my wrestling world, and trips and all sorts of things and weird occasions. And so a friend of ours says, Jim, you should, write a book. And I said, I don't know. So what happened was my wife and I talked about it, and she got me this little dictaphone that I could talk into. And then I'd write down, stories when I thought of them, and then I'd write them down. And we came up with like 45 different stories, and every one of them are true. And when you read this book, and Stu, you'll have to give me your address. I'll send you a book.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate that.
Okay, but this book is all true. And people who read the book said, geez, you're lucky you're alive. And I said, I know. I said, I've been very blessed, because there's been a lot of times, for instances, I'll tell one story. Wahoo McDaniels, that's my song, my Bruce Springsteen copy of his Badlands. And there it is there. Wahoo, we were leaving Sisseton, South Dakota, and we were going to Winnipeg. It was about 200 miles, and it was snowing like a son of a gun. And Wahoo just was made honorary chief of the Sisseton Indian tribe, so they gave him a big old war, a big bonnet, So, and Wahoo used to like he had everything. He was taking speed, and he was taking painkillers, and then he'd take a little bit of booze. So when I'm driving down the road, and I'm only going 55 miles an hour, and it's snowing like a son of a gun, and we're on Highway 29 going right to Winnipeg. And Wahoo used to talk like this. Boy, he said, why don't you pull over right now? He said, we're never going to get there in time. He said, let me drive. And I said, Wahoo, are you okay? And he said, sure. So I get in the front seat. Rene Goulet is in the back seat. So Wahoo gets in the driver's seat, and all of a sudden he's going 80 miles an hour in this snowstorm. And all of a sudden he's starting to talk, and he's starting to slur like this. And all of a sudden I see his head go down like this, and the car started doing 360s at 80 miles an hour. And I said, oh my God. And finally, you couldn't see anything. It was just snow all over the place. And thank God there wasn't another car on the road. We all would have got killed. So the car sort of went into the side of this snowbank, and when it did, the wheels were spinning. So I dove over, put the car in park, and jumped out of the passenger side, and I ran over, and I was just livid. And I opened the door. I said, Wahoo, God dang it. I said, you almost killed us. And he was passed out. He was completely out. So Rene Goulet and I dragged him, put him in the back seat, and we drove to Canada and went across the customs. The guy says, who's in the back? And I said, Wahoo McDaniel. And the agent said, is he drunk? And I said, hell yeah. So he said, okay, go ahead, to Winnipeg. And Wahoo the next day didn't even remember driving. And that's a true story.
Oh, my days.
It was
Crazy.
Like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Just blackout, like, oh my word.
But this book is I wound up writing it, and then I sent the whole thing to a company called Blurb, BLURB, which is online, and I think it's like $25 or $27. And they produce the book, and they give me X amount of dollars per sale. And I've done this all along since like 2016, 7 years. And the reason why I haven't done it on Amazon or eBay is they take so much of the profit. It's hardly worth your time, unless you sold, 10,000 books. I'd love to send 10,000 of these, but I'd probably sell in between, 150 and 250 books a year. So it's nice, and people that have read the book all say that it was great stories, and the one thing they say to me, they say, Jim, you're lucky you're alive, and I said, I know.
Justin Clapper has got a copy of the book. He told me this. He sent me a voice note this morning, and he wants us to say it was signed by yourself, and he will not open it because it's been signed by, because he holds you in such high regard. And you.
Oh, geez. Tell him to read the daggone thing.
Honestly, he told me this morning because he wanted to ask. He sent me a lot more questions, obviously, so I had to select the ones. But he said, like, I haven't read it because you've signed it, because you personally signed it, and he loves you guys from the AWA. That's why he's not opened and read it, because he holds you in such high esteem, Jim.
Well, I tell you, I hope he opens it up, because the stories are really short, and I wanted to one of my prized. Let me see if I can find it in here real quick. One of my prized chapters is my passion for Bruce Springsteen, and I wound up, I've seen Bruce 44 times in 45 years in 13 cities. And he was kind enough to, he gave my kids some guitar picks, and I've seen him, and been with him backstage, and he's just been so good to us. And that's one of my big deals, from being a pro wrestler, because hang on, I'm just going to say something right here. Murray, I'm on my podcast. I'll call you later.
There we go.
What? I don't know. I'll have to check. Okay, bye. Sorry, Stu.
It's all right. Don't worry, Jim. Don't worry. It's life. These things happen.
It is. Hey, Jesus.
Absolutely.
The cat quieted down. He must have been fed. So.
Now, I've got some questions for you as well. I want
Sure.
to open with. I did it differently. I wanted, because the fan questions, obviously, I want them to do them first. But yeah, I wanted to talk about, obviously, we know you for tag wrestling predominantly, but you were in singles for years with WWE. I'd forgotten how long you were still in WWF, actually, but you had your singles run as well. How was it, doing singles, after doing tag team so predominantly?
Well, like I said, I needed to work, and when Vince wasn't going to do anything with me as a single match, so he used me, to do jobs for some of the big heels. So I did have a match. Matter of fact, I had a couple draws with Bret Hart in Philadelphia at the Spectrum that were incredible. One in Madison Square Garden. But there's one right now that you can look on YouTube with Randy Savage. And Randy Savage, at this time, he had Scary Sherry was his valet. So we had a match on TV, and I think it was one of the first Raws or something like that. And the very opening sequence, I had some, let's see, did I have in? No. Randy had something on me, and I threw him in drop down, and I hit him with the drop kick. And when I hit him with the drop kick, I hit him right in the mouth, and he got up spitting blood. His lip was cut, and I thought, oh, Jesus, here we go. But we had a hell of a match, and it was funny because after the match, as we went through the curtain of the studio, Vince was there, and he came up and he shook both of our hands, and he said, fellas, that was the best TV match I've ever seen. So I don't know. He might have been blowing smoke up my ass, but at the same time, it was nice because I thought the same thing. We had a great match. And there was other times that I worked with a couple guys, and like Ted DiBiase, who I've known for a long time. I had a match with him in Omaha, and we had a hell of a match. And then out of the clear blue sky, he cut off my comeback and just, wound up beating me, and I was furious. I didn't talk to him again for a month or so. I said, come on. I said, Jesus Christ, Ted, what are you going to be, world champion or what, But, that's the way, you have different personalities in pro wrestling. And, some people want to get over at any cost, and some people want to get over, but at the same time, they want to have a good match. So, I had to do that for Vince. I was very disappointed. It hurt me, but hey, like Larry the Axe Henning told me, he said, Jim, remember this. And I said, what's that? And he said, there is no job to be done that is too big. So I pondered that for about 20 years.
It resonated in the end.
Yes.
Absolutely. What were some of your favorite towns, cities, arenas, stadiums that you've wrestled in?
Oh, gosh.
I'd love to ask you that. I know you've wrestled all over the world. I know there's going to be many, but, maybe like 3 or 4 places, and just, getting to see places as well, not just wrestling in these towns and cities.
Well, Winnipeg was always a great town, AWA town in Canada for Greg and I, and me especially. I had an hour draw with Nick Bockwinkel, and that again is on YouTube. If you press YouTube, Brunzell versus Bockwinkel, I think it was in like 81 or 82, but we had a hell of a match for an hour. But Winnipeg, Denver, Green Bay, St. Paul, Milwaukee, those were all really good towns, for the AWA. And then, the WWE, we had, we wrestled in every doggone town you could think of. But we had a real nice following in Boston and Toronto. We had some real, nice matches there. And then, a couple other cities, like St. Paul and Tampa for Brian. And so, it was spread out a little bit.
Absolutely. Now, you've alluded to your drop kick. I've always held your drop kick in high esteem. I often duplicated, just I'm getting tongue-tied here. Never replicated. But obviously, Randy Orton's got a good drop kick. Bob Holly had a decent drop kick. Dolph Ziggler. But yeah, your drop kick, man, it's got to be said, it's perfectly done. I know you've spoken about it earlier, but I wanted to ask as well.
Well, see, I was a high jumper in high school and college. I was a 2-time state champion, and I wound up lettering for Minnesota, and my best jump was 6'7.5", and I had 37-inch vertical, which was, they say white man can't jump, but I was completely the opposite of that. And I used that to great benefit. And, I've seen a lot of kids. Barry Orton had a nice, the Orton boy, Bobby's boy, the one who got hurt. He had a nice drop kick. There's a couple guys, that had good drop kicks, but people, I know they realize, I had a hell of a drop kick for 20 years. And I knocked out a couple people, and they'd always say, like, Jim Neidhart was so afraid of my drop kicks. He said, "Oh, Jim, you're going to kick my teeth out." And I said, "No, I'm not." I says, "When you come off the rope, just put your hand like this." So I remember one time where it was a big match too, and it was the Killer Bees against the Hearts, and I'm making a comeback against Jim, and I throw him in for the drop kick, and he pulls away, so he sort of falls back, and I extend trying to hit him, and I don't hit him with the drop kick, but when I came down, the heel of my boot hit him right here on the cheekbone and cut him open. And I thought, Jesus Christ. I said, Brett, get in here, because he thought he had no idea. He thought I hit him with the drop kick and opened him up. So he didn't realize he pulled away and my boot hit him as he hit the ground. So, but I was blessed and wound up, having some great drop kick pictures, and it was just something I could do. So You know, if you got a weapon in your pocket, you know, you got to use it. I shouldn't say a weapon, but yeah, I was very fortunate.
You were obviously heavily involved with American football as well. I thought I'd like to ask about that. You know, did that give you a good basis? Did you take anything away from the football that you got into wrestling with, or was it just totally separate?
Well, the fact of it is, Stu, I wasn't good enough to play in the NFL. I tried with the Washington Redskins. I was invited to a camp down there. And, you know, I was 6'1", 225 pounds, and they had me at tight end, and they didn't keep any tight ends. And that very year, in 1972, the Washington Redskins won the Super Bowl. So I remember when George Allen took us, and there was 60 of us there that were trying out for this team. And he told us, he says, I'm going to tell you guys right now. He says, all you guys, you know, played in college or did this or did that or whatever, had some experience in the NFL. He says, there's going to be very few of you that gets called back for our camp in fall. So I just want to let you know that. So it was funny because I had the fastest time. We had to run on mud. It had rained that night before in the morning, and it was just horrible. And I had the fastest time for tight ends at 4.9 in the 40, which I'd run before in, you know, 4.6 in college. So it turned out that they had invited back two guys from this group of people. And one was a kid from, I think he was from Pittsburgh. His name was Herb Mulkey. And he was faster than he was the fastest guy at this tryout camp. And he wound up being an all-pro punt returner that 1972 team that won the Super Bowl. And then they invited back a quarterback from Minnesota who went to North Dakota, and he was a hockey player too. His name was Jerry Troyan, and he was like 6'4" and 220, and he threw a real nice football. And I think he might have even been on their cab squad for that year. But so, you know, I tried and I realized, you know, I wasn't good enough. So I thought I'm going to go back to the university and get my degree. I had 30 credits left. And then that's when Greg approached me, called me, and he says, hey, he says, Dad's going to have a wrestling camp. And we got Ken Patera, who just came back from the Olympics, you know, from the weightlifting. And then we said, he got Khosrow Vaziri, who was Iranian champ.
Shiki.
Yeah, Shiki, God rest his soul. And then Bob Bruggers, who was an NFL linebacker. And then Ric Flair and myself and Greg. So that was the camp. And, you know, Billy Robinson beat the shit out of us every day for 6 days a week, you know, 6 weeks long. And it was 6 hours a day. God, 666. That's not a good number. So I remember, you know, when we got done with that camp, it was quite an experience. And we all felt, you know, none of us were smartened up. You know, we didn't know anything about, you know, what we were going to do or this or that, or, you know, how in wrestling, it's an art, you know, you take care of your opponent. He takes care of you, you know, blah, 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 you know, you lay them in and you work hard. So that's what we did. So it was a great transition for me because it enabled me to do something athletic that I could be good at and make a living at.
We've heard so much about the camp and all you guys being there, how tough it was there. Can only imagine how was your mental state with that? And obviously what the drills you was doing, obviously you said how long the days were. Yeah. Just
well, see, I took pride in my workouts and I was always in good shape, you know, and I remember and see Billy Robinson, he was from Manchester, England, and he was a British champion, and he had gone to that old school of submission holds with Billy Riley and Carl Gotch and all these guys. So he was a bit of a sadist. So he would get you and he could grab any part of you and make you howl like a baby. I mean, or a wolf, you know, he'd hurt you. So we had to do this, you know, every day we'd go through, you know, we do Well, here's another thing. We do free squats. A lot of people say, you got to work your legs, blah, blah. So we did free squats and we did 10 sets. We worked up to, in a matter of 6 weeks, 10 sets of 100 reps. So we did 1,000 free squats about every other day. And my legs were way bigger than when I used to squat 400 and some pounds, and I could feel, boom, I could feel like I could jump up and hit my head on the rim. So we did that, and we did, wheelbarrows and all sorts of stuff. And then Billy would inflict these submission holds on you, And so when I'd see my buddies who I played football with on the weekends, we'd have a couple beers, and I said, "Do you want to see this hole?" And they said, "No." None of them wanted to see the hole because I put a couple holes, And so I stopped doing that, but and then it's funny because Stu, after each day, Vern would come with about 20 minutes left in the workout. And, Vern was a great mat guy, he'd jump our ass and tear us up, he'd spin us around and flip us over and also, and he did that, maybe 2 or 3 times a week. So I was very glad when that camp was over, and I'll never forget my first match. It was December 27th, 1972, Fargo, North Dakota. It was at the Armory there, and I wrestled a fellow, another Minnesota amateur wrestler guy. His name was Dennis Stamp. And we had a 20-minute draw. And I remember coming into the locker room afterwards, and I thought, God, I was mad. So I kicked the garbage can, I acted like a fool in my first match. So Rhodes, who was the main eventer that night, he comes up to me, Dusty used to lisp a little bit, and he said, "Jimmy," he said, I just want to tell you right now, he said, "that was a stinker of a match." And he says, "Don't worry about it because you're going to have a lot of more stinkers in your career. Just learn from him." And he walked away. So that was my first advice as a pro wrestler after my first match.
When did you feel comfortable in the ring, going into the early days? When did you feel like I'm set in there now, I've had the grounding with Byrne, with Billy Robinson. When did you feel personally?
I think after about close, I think when I went down to Kansas City, because the pressure was off, because I was a local kid, from St. Paul, White Bear Lake, it's 10 miles north of St. Paul. So, the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul are close. So, I had a pretty good career in high school and in college. And, it was sort of good for me to get down in Kansas City and learn my trade, which I did. So I think after I came back from Kansas City, and then I went to Japan for 6 weeks, which was a real rude awakening, because I'd never been there before. I went there by myself and learned from that. And then I came back, and then they tagged Greg and I up as 1975 as the High Flyers. And, the sky was the limit after that. We had great talent to work with and did well. And then shortly thereafter, I had my first big match with Nick Bockwinkel. And I believe it was in 1981. And we had an hour draw in St. Paul, and it was a hell of a match. And I worked my ass off. And Nick was about 42 at the time. And he was in there step for step. And I mean, we had a heck of a match. And that one also is on YouTube, 60 minutes. So I don't know if you get the YouTube over there. If you put Bockwinkel and Brunzell, you'll see it.
We do. And obviously my friend JC, he will send me stuff as well. But I will definitely, I need to watch more of the AWA. Obviously I've seen plenty.
Okay.
But there's still more to see, because I go back to this. I don't think we got the territories on TV over here to the best of my knowledge, which is a shame, really.
Probably not. You probably got the Ted Turner, and then you got Vince. Probably, so, yeah. It's
a treasure trove for us younger guys, going back and watching all this stuff you guys know pre pre-WWE. It's fantastic for us. I love wrestling history. I really, really do. Absolutely.
Well, now it's sort of in a muck because, like I say, everything's the same in the WEW and the WWE. So it's hard for me to watch. I try not to critique it, but some guys I've seen work in the young Orton kid I consider good. Jeff Owens I consider very good. There's a couple of guys in there, and there's probably a lot more. I just don't watch it. But, I just wish them good careers and tell them to save their money and, protect one another.
Absolutely. I think some more tips and advice for young talents, like, because UK is flourishing, with the independents. It's the sold out shows and stuff like that. Some tips from you, man, that I know they'd like to take stuff on board from a guy like yourself, who's in the business for so many years and at that top level.
The first thing you have to realize that it is a business. So in order for you to be a good businessman, you have to take care of your body. You have to take care of your body. You have to work out. There's a lot to be said for, performance enhancing drugs. The steroids were huge in the WWF when I was in there in the middle 80s, and they've shown their head, in all sports, and they do, provide you with an opportunity to gain muscular weight. You have to work out, you have to eat good. But I think that if guys, just take care of their bodies and learn, be willing to learn and be willing to accept criticism, and then realize that wrestling is an art, and it's an art against good and evil. You can have two good guys wrestle each other and there'll be a good match. And you can have two bad guys wrestle each other and one of them will be a fan favorite, maybe. So, that's my advice, and just take care of yourself and take care of your family first.
Do you think guys are rushed into the business from your point of view? Do you think guys need to be trained longer instead? Do you think in that respect? Say about the dangers of this, especially with some UK promotions. I've heard Whitrins that guys aren't trained correctly, and that's dangerous. What are your thoughts on that with guys in the business?
Well, see, like any business, there's a lot of charlatans, Stu, and the main thing is to go where somebody is reputable, and, like when I was around, I mean, they had Harold Matsuda in Florida who trained, Brian Blair and a lot of guys in Florida. Then you had the Funks and the Von Erichs in Texas. And then you had the Watts in Oklahoma. And then you had the Gagnes, in Minnesota. And you just have to have a reputable guy who knows what he's doing. I mean, there's so many of these fly-by-night guys that say, yeah, I can make you a pro wrestler. They're not, And then, you watch, you can see as soon as they go in the ring that they don't know what they're doing. And they're going to learn by mistakes. That's the way you learn. And then hopefully they don't learn by mistakes that lead to injuries. So, I know there's a lot of wannabes, people see guys on TV and they say, oh man, I want to be a pro wrestler. I want to be a superstar. I'm going to drive a, big car and I'm going to have girls hanging on me and I'm going to be this and that, and it doesn't happen that way. It could, there's only one Hulk Hogan. And, if my best advice to somebody is if you want it bad enough, you'll make it true. You'll make it happen, but it's going to take a lot of hard work and dedication and discipline.
Absolutely. No sound advice. Thank you, Jim. I know the younger guys will take this on board. Absolutely. I tell you what as well, it's going to be the biggest show in the UK next month. I don't know if you're aware of this. AEW are coming to Wembley Stadium.
I heard that.
nearly 80,000 tickets sold, considering the company,
Wow.
The company's only been going since 2019, Jim, very much in its infancy, but obviously the Khans, they've been around sport. They get the entertainment side, don't they? They've got the TV deals, obviously, with TNT over there as well. What do you reckon to that the UK shows nearly sold out and they're only 4 years old as a company?
Well, first of all, you got that Mr. Khan, who's probably worth 3 times as much as Vince McMahon, so money's not an object. And they have nice talent there, and I know the bald-headed manager. I can't think of his name right now. That guy.
Don Callis.
Don Callis.
Don Callis.
Yes, he was. A matter of fact, I wrestled him in Winnipeg out on a parking lot of a big grocery store, one of my last matches. And he wanted to learn so bad. And he was very good. And he's done excellent as far as being a manager. And, I remember him as a good looking kid. He had nice hair and everything. Now I see him and he's bald headed and but he's got a good gig and so I think that the AEW is going to, they have a definite audience, and I think, the fact that they've sold 80,000 tickets there, more power to them, and hopefully it'll be a great night for wrestling.
Sorry, you go first.
What's the date of it? It's coming up, isn't it?
Sunday, August 27th, which is a bank holiday here in the UK, so it's on the Sunday. They're obviously doing stuff on the Saturday, conventions and stuff like that. I can't get that. I'd love to go on the Saturday, but my line of work, I just can't have Saturday, Sunday off bank holiday. But I'll be there. Yeah. I'll be there for Sunday on the show because I was at SummerSlam 92. I was at the last big show there. My dad took me. I was 6 years of age, so I was like, I've got to go to this because it's the biggest show since 1992 on these shores, Jim.
Wow. It'll be big.
It's not just the Brits, you know what I mean? The French are going to come over, the Germans, the Dutch. I got poo-pooed. Some Americans, not all Americans. It won't sell more than 40, 50,000. And I told them it'll be close to a sellout. I told them this. They weren't having it. We're a different beast over here, I think, in terms of that. You've still got the staunch fan base in the UK, Jim.
Oh yeah, I agree. And Europe. I mean, this is still a growing novelty for them because they've had the WW, F or WWE, and then they've had different, German wrestling and European wrestling and British wrestling, but they haven't had, the big AEW, I mean, good for them. And I hope it's a great show. I'll be anxious to see, I know that, they'll probably have a real nice show. And I'm trying to think who is the main event. I can't remember. They must have.
They have. Do you know what? This is weird. It's funny you should say this because it's very current with it. They haven't announced any matches.
Okay.
I heard it could be Kenny Omega versus Will Ospreay for the 3rd time, which would be a brilliant. They've said it could be John Moxley and Omega because obviously the two factions were going at it. Me personally, I'd give it to Will Ospreay because he's British and have him and Kenny.
Sure.
But it doesn't necessarily align with the storylines at the moment because they've come away from the second match. So it's interesting. It gets you talking, doesn't it?
Well, I would think that if they have a British wrestler, they better put him there on the main event because that's going to add to the draw. There's no question about it. And that's a hands down deal for me. Even if it's a semi main event or a double main event, it's well worth it.
But their second bout at the pay-per-view at Double or Nothing in Vegas. Oh no, is it Forbidden Door? Sorry, when they got New Japan in. It's for me personally match of the year. The 40 minutes didn't feel like 40 minutes, Jim.
That's great.
It flew by.
40 minutes is a long time now for these matches because I very seldom have heard. I've never seen the matches, but I never have heard a match going over 30 minutes in the WWE or the AEW. I mean, they might go 30 maybe, but I remember, and they, the AWA used to have 60-minute matches, and Vince didn't like that. He wanted to get as much bang for the dollar. So he thought, geez, an hour-long match, I can get 4 matches in there, and I can, sell 8 different favorable, stars, their paraphernalia. So, but I'll be curious to see how it does, Stu, and I hope everybody has a good time.
Oh, it's going to be incredible. You know what? We're crazy. The Brits, we're crazy over here. I'm telling you now, there'll be a lot of drinking. There'll be a lot of alcohol down in London. I've not been down to London in years either. So it's going to be one of them, man. It's just, you have to. I've had to go to it. I was like, I was there in '92 at SummerSlam. It's just, it's got to be done. It's got to be done.
Well,
absolutely.
Stu, I've never been to Europe. I've been to Japan 6 or 8 times, and I was in Australia, and I was in Malaysia and Borneo and Singapore. Never did get to make the European trip. I was scheduled a couple times, but Vince fired me. So
I'm surprised.
Yeah, I know. Well, here's the deal. My wife and I and another couple of our friends are going on a cruise in late October, and we're going to go through Europe. We're going to land in Heathrow, and then we're going to go 15 cities in 22 days, and we're going to be on the Princess cruise line. So we wind up in Rome, and we're going to be in Rotterdam and London and all different sorts. So I'm looking forward to that first time. So we've been reading up on, places to go and see. So anxious to do that.
It'd be nice to have you here,
Yes.
man. Absolutely. Now, before we go, I'd just like to promote Matlin's again, the autobiography, your autobiography. Let's plug away. We've got to plug these things.
Well, here it is again. And the Matt Lyon song is more or less available for me, but and that's a Bruce Springsteen Badlands, which I rewrote the words to my wrestling. And G.B. Layton, who is a rock and roll artist in the Twin Cities, who's been around for 20 years, big friend of Bruce's, recorded it. And the book, like I say, is available on Blurb, BLURB, and they've been very kind to me. And that picture, that front page picture, is my dad was in the Navy, flew Air Sea Rescue. So this was in 1956, and we were in the Marshall Islands in an atoll called Kwajalein, and we lived in a little house there. And the atoll, the island Kwajalein, was a mile and a half long and a half a mile wide, and it was nothing but coral. So we stayed there, no school. I was only going to be in kindergarten for 1 year. We were there, so just one of the unique experiences. And
Amazing.
yeah, so I Stu, I really want to thank you for having me on. I enjoyed it.
Anytime,
Okay.
Jim. Anytime, not a problem. I've loved hearing it. I've loved hearing about obviously the story. And do you know what? The first match and the first VCR VHS tape I had was the 1988 Survivor Series. Obviously, you were on one of the teams in that, so I always remember seeing you. That was the first time I knew of Jim Brunzell. I was probably about 3 or 4. It would have been it would have been a couple of years after I really got into it. It was like 1990.
Okay.
That was the first tape, the second annual Survivor Series that you were on, man.
Oh, geez. Yeah. Well, listen, like I say, after we're done, send me your mailing address and I'll send you one of my autographed books.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Before we go, Jim, can I just have a little plug for Stu's Wrestling Podcast from yourself?
Sure.
Before you go.
Okay. Let me see. Fans in England, Wales, wherever you are over in Europe, you got to listen to Stu's Wrestling Podcast. Probably the very best. Don't miss it.
Thank you very much, Jim. My guest today for episode 153 of Stu's Wrestling Podcast. WWE, AWA, obviously territories as well that you wrestled in. You wrestled across the world. It's Mr. Jumpin, Jim Brunzell, legend of wrestling. Thank you so much for coming on, man. I've had an absolute blast having you on.
Thanks, Stu. God bless. Take care.